Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's LinkedIn Live. I am very happy today to have as a very special guest Byron Lichtenstein from Onsite. I've worked with 3 or 4 of Onsite's portfolio companies over the years, all of which have been really great success stories, and I'm eager to learn more both about Byron, but also about Onsite's process. So thanks for taking time to join us today.
Super honored to be here, Karen. I saw the history of folks that you've interviewed, and I feel maybe not worthy of the seat, but I'm really excited to chat today, and I know that everybody I've talked to that's worked with you throughout our portfolio has kind of raved, and so very very much looking forward to it.
Thank you. Well, again just really excited for this conversation. Maybe you could start. I know you're the leader of Onsite's Onsite team, and you spent about a decade working with companies on their scale-up journeys. Can you talk a little bit about that, about the Onsite process and how you help companies navigate these milestones?
Yeah, for sure. So, our team was founded 20 years ago, I guess just over 20 years ago. So Onsite as a whole, for anybody who's not familiar, founded in 1995, really focused on the growth stage of software, right? And so you could imagine back in 95, there weren't that many software companies, but they were, as you looked at kind of ones that had product market fit, the goal was find, basic thesis of software will outrun hardware and kind of take over. And then the second thesis piece was, yes, there was a lot of venture businesses, but like we want to be invested in places and in businesses where product market fit has already happened. And our job is really, how do you take amazing teams and amazing products and actually scale those out, right? So they've sold maybe 1 to 10 customers. How do you take it to 100,000, 10,000 customers? So that's where we spend most of our time. And then, as you mentioned, the Onsite team, that team was founded, as just over 20 years ago by Hillary Gosher, who still leads the team today overall. And then, but I think of it as kind of in twofold. One, so I lead our diligence and growth strategy team. So that is the team that really helps as we actually evaluate new investments, as well as think about like, what is the growth strategy? How do we set up the right game plan moving forward? Whether that's minority or majority, we always want to be good partners and kind of hit the ground running. And so we make sure that right after we write the check, like, how do we brainstorm with that founder or with that CEO to make sure that we're going to be good partners and that there's a roadmap to doing that? And then the bigger part of our team, and honestly, probably the more important part of our team, are our centers of excellence. And so just over a decade ago, we realized that as we were growing as a firm and we were growing our portfolio, we said, like, what can we do to really, what I call change the math, right? Like, how do you actually have a outsized impact, both for our investors, our LPs, but also for our companies? Like, how can we provide a product that no one else can provide? And we said, we had a few hundred companies at the time that we had invested in over, at that point, 15 years of history. And we said, we've seen them through all the stages. Yes, we have data. So like, we collect a ton of data and we collect a ton of benchmarks, but more importantly, like, we should know how to run a software business, at the growth stage almost better than anybody. And so what we did is we went out and we built what we call our centers of excellence, and we want to look just like a software company looks. So we have, it all starts with R&D. So we have a product team and a tech team, engineering team. We have obviously go to market. So we have sales, marketing, customer success. We have a talent team, right? Like you don't have a software business without really amazing talent. So we have a whole talent team that thinks about both executives to bring in, but also, more and more so, like, how do we get individual contributor talent even into the portfolio, right? I know everybody needs more engineers. So like, how do we actually go and help our company source that? And so over time, what we've done is we've built that team out. So as a total, we have about 140 people who just think about adding value and working with our portfolio companies to help them grow, right? And at the end of the day, like, we're not in the driver's seats. Our execs are kind of the heroes of these stories, and they're really the ones who are driving. And our job is like, can we help them see around the corner? Can we say, hey, there's traffic up ahead, and actually, like, let's take this off ramp and get back on at some point. And it's really just about smoothing the journey out. They know where they want to go. they have the driver wheel, but if we can help them get there a bit faster, we'll obviously do that.
Yeah. One of the things that I've really admired about Insight, there are other large companies who do what you do, who come in with a playbook, and I would almost use the word smother the existing organizations, and they're super successful from a financial standpoint. So I know my clients that have exited to a couple of these companies, and they've been very financially successful. But it really is this is how you're going to do things. And there's the box, and you will play in the box. And it's part of the money comes with strings. And so that's part of the string that comes with that money. My experience with Insight and my clients with Insight it's more of a showing, right? It's not that there's never a moment when there's a way to go and it's clear. And so you will do this. But for the most part, it is here is help, here is support, here is advice. So can you talk a little bit about how you do that?
Yeah.
With this team of 140 people?
I'm glad that comes through, because that is what we aim for, right? I think that we like to say we have a book of plays, not a playbook, right? Yeah. The goal is really to document it and use data, and I think a lot of that honestly comes from our venture heritage, right? If you reverse back to fund 1, fund 2, fund 3, because of where the software market was at that time, yes, we always done growth stage, but it was growth with that still felt a bit venture-y, right? As you think about going through the .com boom, et cetera. Versus today, the market is obviously really mature, and so you do have that more what I call traditional buyout private equity playbook of go in, have your large company, like oftentimes maybe slightly slower growth. And so you have the playbook of like, here's what I do to, squeak out as much growth as possible but I'm going to take a lot of cost out. For us, like what we found is the portfolio is diverse. And so the plays have to be diverse, and all we can really do is figure out what is the right recipe. And we always want to make sure that we are adjusting to what's already there. And like, we obviously do minority deals and we do majority deals. And so it's just going to vary a little bit, but my favorite stat, quarter in and quarter out, roughly 75 to 80% of our portfolio works with our Onsite team. Right. And that's in a scenario where only about 30% of our companies are where we have a controlling stake or we have a majority stake. And so that means that there's a lot of minority companies that are still working with us, that want to work with us, and but don't actually have to listen to us, right? And so like the only way for the only reason they work with us is because we're able to actually show value, and we're able to give them data and hopefully be useful. And so I think we take that kind of way of working with our companies of our goal is to convince and to use data and to partner. And we also apply that to our control deals. And so, I do think working with us hopefully feel like a true partnership. And what I always do, I talked about, a lot of my job is after we do the investment, going to, our exec teams and like trying to come up with what's the plan for us to engage, what's the plan as a company, where we want to go. And like, we always, one of my partners, Adam Berger, I've learned a ton from him, former Insight CEO multiple times over. And I've learned so much from him. And he always says, we want to give every exec a red pen and a green pen. And here's the plan. Here's what we learned in diligence. And you tell us what's wrong and tell us what's right. And that tends to be our approach, is like, what's not broken, don't try and fix it. Just because they use, Intact, but like we like NetSuite, doesn't mean you need to rip out Intact just because we like NetSuite, right? If it's working, it's working. And so we want to be least disruptive while still driving towards the right end outcome.
Yeah. So in some ways, it's invoking curiosity on both sides, right? How can this work better for me, and how can this work better for you? And I think curiosity is certainly a theme that's come up in many of my C-suite interviews from successful leaders about not having the right answer, but being curious about what's happening right here, and how can we both learn from that? That's really great.
Totally.
What would you say are some of the unique needs of growth stage companies as opposed to companies at other phases?
Yeah, I think what's interesting about the growth stage is, and we do everything Series A through take private, right? And so you can argue that that's a pretty large span of growth stage. But I'd say, at the earliest stages of growth, like, you're still trying to figure out your team, and you're still trying to figure out like the next motion. Like, oftentimes I think before we invest, right, really kind of that seed stage, maybe early Series A, but we do a lot of Series A, but maybe that early Series A, it's really about like figuring out your product and like getting your first couple of customers and like your first go-to-market motion. And I'd say what's unique about maybe you've hired a few execs, but oftentimes you have like, one or two key execs and a bunch of, jacks of all trades. What we find at the growth stage that oftentimes happens is, one, you go from your first sales motion of maybe I was like high touch enterprise sales, like go out into the field, and like you need to introduce inside sales because you realize that, you're just not, you're landing whales and you're landing that every, one every 2 quarters, and like you need to just get a lot more consistent. So like we oftentimes find, especially around, call it the $20 million mark, like that's when you start to usually add your second sales motion, and that comes with a whole new set of skills. Or maybe, maybe it is, you were PLG and now you actually need to add a sales led motion. So that happens. Oftentimes you're kind of launching your second product. And so like we have kind of whole set of teams that think about like product launch. And so it's okay, I've built my platform. I know I have my initial wedge, but now I got to figure out how do I drive net retention. And then I think what's even more so, and I've seen it at especially if you're successful at the growth stage, like you're almost definitely going to adjust your team. Like, and you've seen this story multiple times, Karen, but it's, there's always this piece of you hire the team for the moment because my wife's a founder. She has an amazing team right now, but like you're finding people who are like the problems to go from 0 to 1 are really hard, and you have to get through that. And once you get through that, like it may not be the exact right team for the next phase of growth, right? And so how do you think through, all right, at what point do you make those shifts and what point do you make those transitions? And I think those are probably the hardest, right? Both emotionally and
Yeah.
and
It is because you've been through the wars together, right? As you were growing and building your team. I often think about this as, do I have people will develop, not all people, right? But most of the people on your team who are smart, bright people and know the company, know the product, know the market, can grow and develop. The question is often, do you have the time for them to develop?
Totally.
Right. And because in a hyper growth or high growth company, you don't always have the time. And then occasionally you'll find people who are like, I really love this stage of the company. I love taking a company to $100 million, but I know the products the problems are going to be different for the next 100 million. And that's not my sweet spot.
Totally.
So sometimes you have people who get it. Yeah.
I think there's always a fundamental tension between, and I'm going to simplify it. I love your thoughts on it too, but I always think there's a fundamental tension between experience and kind of eagerness, for lack of a better word.
That's great. Yeah.
Like there's, and I think the best teams need both.
Yeah.
Right.
Great.
It's interesting. I was talking to, one of our CEOs just a couple of weeks ago, and we were doing kind of like almost like an interview like this with some of our other CEOs, and I've learned a lot from him, and it was interesting. Like as he went through his journey, at first I was super impressed because he had almost none of the emotional baggage. He took really good care of the team that got him to one place that he was like, I'm going to make a lot of change because I know I need to get 3, 4, 5x bigger and rapidly. And so he made those shifts, and then like talking through it, he was like, I probably made the shifts too quickly. Right. And we should have done it more. Like we should have struck that better balance of, I need to keep some experience. I need to keep some culture holders, but there are key parts of my organization that I know have to shift. And so what is the right cadence of doing it is always the hardest problem to solve. And so I think for at the early stages, you obviously need to add people. You don't want to mess with the team too much. And then at the experience stages, like if something's not working, it's not working, but if something's humming, like big companies, they can kind of run, right? And
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
obviously as you make, but I think in the growth stage, like especially, you're just, even when you're going from 100 employees to 300 employees to 900
Mm.
employees to 2,000 employees, like those are huge shifts. And so like I think that's unique to the growth stage versus like 2,000 versus 5,000. Yes, I'm sure it's a shift. And I've talked to people who've done that. Like it's definitely a shift, but it's like you as CEO have already kind of lost touch with how do I manage.
That's right.
Versus if you were managing at 100 employees, like you could touch everybody, right? Like you
Mhm.
had direct contact,
Yeah.
and within 2 to 3 years, you now are at 1,000 employees, and you're like, I don't know how to. My management style is fundamentally different,
Yeah.
and that's the hardest shift.
Yeah. I love this experience versus eagerness. I will use it with accreditation. It's terrific. Yeah, I mean, at some point, and we certainly experienced this at Compact when I was there, you stop knowing names, of course, at some point, then you start recognizing faces. And then they're like, like departments that are just names, right? And I think the companies that are most successful take the time to develop, particularly in the middle of the organization, these cross-functional cohorts, either through development programs that are put together, but some way for people to get to know each other in other parts of the organization. Because otherwise, what happens is companies get bigger, as they get super siloed, which sort of maximizes that area but doesn't optimize for the whole.
And it's especially relevant today, right? Like because you have more remote workforces, because a lot of people were hired on Zoom or meaning like the silos are real. Like I mean, we face it. Like we're a large firm, but compared to a lot of our companies, like we're not we don't have that many people, but we feel it, right? Like if like we try and do as many, to your point, we try and do as many things of like this week and next week. We actually, if anybody wants a tip, like we're doing secret dinners where basically we do like a random selection of people from the firm and then they go out to dinner. And so like just trying to find ways of that social fabric getting woven together is critical.
Yeah, terrific. So, just to shift our topic a little bit, I'm wondering, just from your perspective, because you do such a broad view of the marketplace, what are some trends that you see emerging that are going to impact your portfolio companies?
Yeah, so there's a lot, right? So we can talk about a few. One, I do think the M&A landscape is really interesting right
Mhm.
now. Like I think that obviously, I know you had the CRO of Splunk on yesterday. That's obviously a huge deal that happened last week. I mean, pretty
Yeah.
pretty wild to see.
Yeah. For
Um,
those that didn't see yesterday, Cisco announced, I think Thursday, Friday last week, that they were acquiring Splunk, which is awesome for everybody.
yeah,
Yeah.
which is amazing. I mean, like obviously both amazing businesses, and I think that we're at an interesting time from a macro standpoint of I think especially a lot of the big strategics and a lot of
Hmm.
the big enterprise software companies out there, that are potential acquirers. I think if you look at the last year, there wasn't as much activity because there's a lot of uncertainty, right? There's a
Hmm.
lot of questions on like how like where exactly is the economy going to land. I think if you look at a lot of 22, people, there's a conflation between what happened with valuations and actually business performance.
Mm.
Like what we saw within our portfolio, and if you look at kind of public results from a lot of either our companies that went IPO or existing public companies, where like performance actually didn't do that badly for a lot of the
Hmm.
businesses in at least in mid 22. And so there's like this weird disconnect. But then you started to see, okay, maybe there's some uncertainty. What it looks like, and obviously I'm not a macroeconomist, so don't hold me to it, but like it seems like there's a like the economy is going to be more resilient, and it's not going to
Mm.
be in a big recession. And so I think people are feeling that softer landing. And so there's a little bit more confidence, I think, from a lot of the acquirers. So like that's part of the perfect storm. The second piece is, growth is becoming a little bit harder, right? Where like we're seeing, especially even in enterprise cycles, I think it plays out in the public data too, of like enterprise buying cycles are getting a bit elongated. And so like like in the last few quarters, like you're seeing that. And so companies are still growing, but they're not like organic growth isn't boosting them as much as it was. And so they're looking for creative ways, which includes inorganic. And then I think you take that, and then the last piece of the storm is you have a lot of smaller businesses, and obviously, we're different. Like, Splunk was a different story, but in terms of scale. But I think you have a lot of smaller businesses where funding is not as easy as it was in 21, and a lot of them raise about 2 years of runway, and maybe they're able to extend it out by getting a bit more efficient with their cash and their operations. But I think a lot of them are starting to get to a point where, like, they have to start thinking about either that next fundraise, or if it doesn't look like that's necessarily on the table, what the next option is. And so I think you get this influence of, like, this confluence of, there are going to be some sellers. There are going to be some companies that feel like, hey, I have a really good product, but my go-to-market just isn't right. It'd be much easier to be part of a bigger platform. I want to continue on with the story. Or, like, I had ambition X, but it's actually, a little bit smaller than X. And so maybe, like, a piece of, like, being acquired would be the best outcome for me. So you have really good sellers. And then I think you have a bunch of buyers who are feeling a bit more confident, or at least steady, but need to get a little bit more growth as they look forward. So I think you'll see a lot more M&A. We're seeing it in the private markets. A lot of our companies are buying kind of smaller, especially on the product side. There are a lot of features that maybe got funded early. Like, they're buying a lot of features. They're also doing some inline consolidation. I think you'll probably see it in the larger public markets as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Definitely extended enterprise buying cycles. And that's just a hump companies had to get over because they hadn't necessarily forecast that. But companies are definitely buying, and a lot of M&A either happening or on the horizon.
Agreed.
So I would certainly agree with those two. I want to talk in our remaining few minutes just a little bit about you as an individual, as a leader. So in these, and all the time you spent at Insight, and certainly your career prior to Insight, I'm curious about what you would say are some of your biggest takeaways around leadership lessons, either your own personal leadership lessons or what you've seen in successful leaders that you've interacted with during this time.
Yeah, I'll talk through two examples. One like my team personally, or like me personally, and then one me in a board context, but also, like, just generally, like, as I look at kind of leadership in the boardroom, especially as an investor. So on the first one, I think one of the biggest lessons I learned, at least with my team and people, is, like, I oftentimes think folks not necessarily, like, afraid of their employees, but, like, are, like, not willing to actually, like, deep dive and have really transparent conversations, right? I think it's critical to, for people to have open conversations about their career and about how you're actually fulfilling that and how you're, like, working together as a team. Like, for myself, I pretty much think every 6 months I take a day or two, and I really just put my head down and say, like, am I learning? Am I continuing to grow? Is this where I want to be? And I think that's, like, natural and healthy, and I encourage my team to do it. And, like, I've had people tell me, like, that's crazy. Like, what if somebody wants to leave? Like, what if you're sparking an idea in somebody and they decide to leave 6 months before you want them to? And, like, my retort is always, I think you should take care of your people. And, like, if they were going to leave because you had one conversation, they're probably going to leave anyway at some point, right? And therefore,
100%, yeah.
Like you should just have, like, you should be caring for your employees. You should take care of them first, and just have those open conversations, right? And so I think that's been a big lessons for me. Is, like, openness and care is big. And I you can ask like, you should ask people that work with me. I don't think anybody would say I'm, like, super easy to work for, but I would also say they'd all think that, like, I do care about them and I do care about their careers, and I think that's critical. So that's, like, me, I guess, personal leadership lesson for, like, managers or budding managers or growing leaders out there. I think from an investor perspective and from a boardroom perspective, I think probably the biggest lesson I've learned over the last over my decade career doing it is consistency is key. We've seen a really crazy 24 months, 36 months, if you take it all the way back to, late 2020, when all this boom started to happen. And, like, I've seen before. You had some investors who are, like, spend at all costs, like hire whoever, like, and had one message, and then the market shifted and they had a whole nother message, and then things went, when things were going well, they loved everybody, and then when things went badly, they said nobody can do anything right. And I think it's just really hard for as an exec to hear that and know who to trust. And I think the biggest lesson I've learned is like, you should just be consistent. In the good times, hear the things you could do better, hear the things that where I would take the business, and then the bad times, like those are the same things you probably need to work on. And it's a lot easier to have those conversations. Like I've had multiple of those conversations where, as in late 21, I said, here are the goals we want to set. And then in late 22, when they didn't happen, like it's an easier conversation to say that if you just know that from the outset, I didn't shift the post on you, the exact same post, and we know where we're going. I think it just helps people know where you stand and to know where you're going to net out. And I think consistency is just critical to leadership, especially in the boardroom.
Yeah, completely agree. Thank you so much for sharing both of those. So my last question, Byron, the tagline for my consulting business is up and to the right, because that's the spot on the 2x2 matrix where we always want to be. Was there a moment in your career when you knew you were moving in that direction that you were going to be successful from a leadership standpoint?
Yeah, and it's going to sound crazy, but like, pre-pandemic, I got this call from our head of investor relations, and he's like, can you go on this 3-day, 5-city tour in Germany to like pitch Insight to a few LPs? And it was like, I was like, all right, who's coming with me? I think I was like a principal at the time.
Yeah.
And I was like, who's coming with? He's like, no, just you. And it was an opportunity where like, I was nervous. I'd never done it before, but I think that it was a moment where like, I realized like, hey, they have clear confidence in me to do it. You get up there and like you're presenting in front of, the 100-person-ish rooms, and I'm like, oh, I actually like kind of know what I'm talking about. And I think it was just this confluence of, given the opportunity to stretch, given an opportunity to maybe fail, but like actually, delivering fairly well. And for me, I think that was a moment where I was like, okay, like I can do this. I get this. I like feel comfortable with where I am. And I appreciate the people that are willing to put me in these, learning scenarios. So that's probably my like the first moment that pops to mind.
Your moment. Terrific. Thanks again. Really enjoyed our conversation, Byron, and best to you and your team and Insight, of course. Take good care.
Thanks so much, Karen. This is awesome. Talk soon.
Bye.